On April 15, 1943, at an altitude of 20,000 feet above the French coast near Dieppe, and Major Donald Blakesley tightened his grip on the control stick of his P-47 Thunderbolt. Below him, breaking through the clouds, appeared the unmistakable outline of a German fighter. After weeks of training frustrations and constant mechanical issues with the new Republic P-47s, and the fourth fighter group was finally about to face the Luftwaffe. The bulky American fighter, mockingly nicknamed the 7-ton milk bottle by British pilots, was about to prove its true potential. And through his gun sight, Blakesley tracked a Focke-Wulf 190 from JG-26. At 300 yards, he pressed the trigger, and unleashing all 8 50-caliber Browning machine guns, the concentrated storm of armor, piercing incendiary rounds, ripped the German aircraft apart in seconds, marking the very first P-47 air victory. From that moment, air combat doctrine began to shift, and the Thunderbolt was not just another fighter. It was a flying weapons platform born of American industrial power. And the Thunderbolt had already seen its first operational mission a month earlier, on March 10, 1943, during a fighter sweep over France. And radio failures forced that mission to abort, leading to the installation of British equipment to improve reliability. And transitioning from the nimble Spitfires of the former Eagle squadrons to the massive P-47 was not easy. At 12 700 pounds empty and nearly 17 500 pounds fully loaded, the Thunderbolt dwarfed German fighters like the Messerschmitt Bf-109. Yet Republic Aviation's Farmingdale plant was producing these giants with staggering speed. One aircraft every 4 hours by April 1943. The Thunderbolt's chief designer, Alexander Kartveli, believed in maximum firepower and survivability, even if it meant extreme size and weight. Where German engineers obsessed over shaving grams, Kartveli added armor, fuel, and guns. And Colonel Hubert Zenk of the 56 Fighter Group immediately grasped the philosophy and drilled his men to use the aircraft's unique strengths. His group, and which arrived in England in January 1943, would go on to claim 674 victories flying P-47s exclusively. The aircraft carried 8 50-caliber Browning M2s, and 4 in each wing, with 2 800 rounds total. At 250 yards, their streams of bullets converged into a kill-kill zone no enemy could withstand. In a single second, and the Thunderbolt could hurl more than 100 heavy projectiles at 800 feet per second. To German intelligence, and this seemed impossible, 8 heavy guns on a single-engine fighter defied their efficiency-driven design philosophy. German doctrine emphasized fewer weapons with precise bursts. The Focke-Wulf 190 typically mounted 2 7.2 mm machine guns and 2 20 mm cannons, but with limited ammunition, German pilots relied on accuracy in short bursts and a style suited against British fighters, but dangerously inadequate against the overwhelming firepower of the Thunderbolt. And within days of Blakesley's victory, P-47s were escorting bombers, though limited by range. Early drop tanks gave only a few hundred miles of coverage. The psychological impact was massive, and German pilots reported that the sight of 8 guns blazing appeared like a beam of light cutting through the sky. By May 1943, and captured Thunderbolt parts confirmed to German engineers that the American system was both rugged and mass-produced with unheard of standardization. And the disintegrating ammunition belts, which dropped cleanly from the aircraft, were another innovation. Unlike German belt systems, and which retained links and added complexity, the American guns could fire their entire load in one continuous burst without malfunction. And the scale of production was staggering, and the Lake City Army ammunition plant in Missouri alone produced over 1.6 billion rounds annually, more than all of Germany's aircraft ammunition combined. And daily Thunderbolt missions could expend hundreds of thousands of rounds, while German units often received weekly allocations smaller than what a single U.S. and group fired in a day. American pilots trained extensively, firing thousands of rounds in practice, and while fuel shortages meant many young German pilots entered combat having barely fired their weapons at all. The P-47 size, once mocked and became its greatest strength. Its massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine and turbo supercharger allowed it to fight effectively at 30,000 feet, and where German BMW and 801 engines lost power. The weight gave it stability and durability, allowing it to absorb punishment no German fighter could survive. Pilots like Francis Gabby Gabreski and Robert S. Johnson exploited these strengths to devastating effect. Johnson once returned to base with over 200 bullet holes in his Thunderbolt, damage that would have downed any Luftwaffe aircraft. By the summer of 1943, the Thunderbolt was not just a fighter but also a feared ground attack platform. Its 8 guns could shred locomotives, vehicles, and entire trains in seconds. A single strafing run could pour nearly 1,000 rounds into a 100-yard stretch of track, crippling German transportation. And by late 1943, rail movement in daylight had become nearly impossible under the threat of Thunderbolt sweeps. And even as Germany introduced heavier, armed fighters like the FW-190s or specialized Sturmgruppen variants with extra armor and 30 mm of cannons, and they could not keep pace. The P-47 could fire far longer, carried more ammunition, and could be replaced faster than Germany could hope to match. American pilots flew with confidence, knowing they had fuel, ammunition, and replacements. German pilots, increasingly outnumbered and short on resources, and fought with growing hesitation. By war's end, more than 1,500 Thunderbolts had been built. They destroyed nearly 4,000 enemy aircraft in air-to-air combat, thousands more on the ground, and obliterated Germany's transportation networks. Their kill ratio exceeded 4.5 to 1, and units like the 56 Fighter Group became legends. Beyond statistics, the Thunderbolt represented the triumph of American industrial philosophy. Mass production, standardization, overwhelming firepower, and logistical supremacy. And the roar of its 8 synchronized Brownings was more than just gunfire. It was the sound of industrial democracy defeating tyranny in the skies of Europe. The Thunderbolt's legacy grew steadily as the war advanced in 1944. With each upgrade, the aircraft became deadlier. The P-47D models carried more ammunition, improved propellers, and eventually a bubble canopy that gave pilots unobstructed views in combat. Later versions even mounted rockets, and turning the already fearsome gun platform into a devastating multi-role aircraft. The P-47 was now capable of tearing apart armored vehicles and blasting hardened targets and still meeting the Luftwaffe head-on in aerial duels. On D-Day, June 6, 1944, the Thunderbolt reached the peak of its reputation. Flying more than 2,000 sorties in a single day, the aircraft annihilated German ground forces and destroyed vehicles, cut rail lines, and strafed enemy positions with relentless efficiency. And while only a few hundred Luftwaffe fighters made it into the skies over Normandy, tens of thousands of Allied aircraft, including swarms of P-47s, overwhelmed them. German forces learned quickly that any movement by daylight risked destruction from above. Vehicle columns were left burning along roads, and the distinctive whistling dive of a Thunderbolt became a sound of dread for German soldiers pinned to the ground. By late 1944, Germany's aircraft production reached its peak, but production numbers could not mask the reality shortages of trained pilots, fuel, and ammunition left most aircraft grounded. The few that flew often faced 10-1 odds in the air. Even the advanced Messerschmitt Me-62 jet fighter, with its speed advantage and heavy cannons, could not tip the balance. Limited ammunition, poor reliability, and the sheer weight of Allied numbers meant the jets were a nuisance rather than a turning point. Against Thunderbolts, their short bursts of fire often missed, while the P-47A's 8 Brownings continued to spray streams of lead with brutal reliability. In the Pacific, the P-47N variant demonstrated just how far American industrial might could stretch the boundaries of design. Fitted with massive internal fuel tanks, it carried more fuel than entire German medium bombers, and this gave it the range to escort bombers over vast ocean distances while maintaining its unmatched firepower. The shift in design philosophy was clear. And, while German engineers still chased finely tuned performance, Americans were building aircraft that defied convention through sheer capacity and abundance. And the statistics behind the Thunderbolt's campaign are staggering. Over 15,600 were built, with peak production topping 400 per month. And they flew nearly 750,000 sorties and claimed more than 3,900 aerial victories. Beyond air combat, they destroyed thousands of locomotives, tens of thousands of vehicles, and crippled Germany's logistics. Rail lines, fuel depots, and convoys all were systematically eliminated by P-47 strafing runs. The Luftwaffe could not contest the skies, and German ground forces soon found themselves without the mobility or supplies to resist advancing Allied armies. And the P-47's superiority was not just in its firepower or armor, but in what it represented. Each aircraft embodied the power of mass production, and the efficiency of supply chains, and the efficiency of the philosophy that quantity with sufficient quality could outmatch even the most advanced enemy technology. And factories in Farmingdale, Evansville, and elsewhere churned out airframes day and night, and, while the Lake City ammunition plant alone produced more 50 caliber rounds than all of Germany's combined aircraft ammunition output, and American workers, many of them women, kept the flow of machines, guns, and ammunition constant, while German factories, and bombed and dependent on forced labor, could no longer keep pace. Pilots who flew the Thunderbolt often spoke of its durability and firepower with reverence. And stories like that of Robert S. Johnson, who limped home in a P-47 riddled with bullet holes after surviving a vicious dogfight, illustrated the aircraft's toughness. Others recalled strafing entire train lines and seeing explosions ripple down tracks as engines erupted in steam and carriages went up in flames. For pilots like Francis Gabby Gabreski, and who became the leading P-47 ace in Europe, the philosophy was simple: put the gun sight on the target, hold the trigger, and let the Thunderbolt do the rest. By 1945, the Luftwaffe had effectively ceased to exist as an effective fighting force. Even as Germany attempted to deploy new weapons, and, from advanced fighters to rockets, they could not counter the relentless waves of Allied aircraft. Thunderbolts, alongside Mustangs and other fighters, ruled the skies unopposed, and each burst of their 8 guns symbolized not only battlefield dominance, but the industrial and logistical machine that stood behind them. In the end, the P-47 was far more than a fighter plane. It was a symbol of American strength, of industry mobilized for war, and of a nation capable of producing in such overwhelming numbers that no enemy could hope to match. And the roar of its engine and the thunder of its guns were more than sounds of battle. They were echoes of a strategy that turned the tide of the war. Through firepower, durability, and sheer industrial might, and the Thunderbolt reshaped the very nature of aerial warfare and left a legacy that extended well beyond 1945.